This is what you expect your cast to look like when you head out to fish with nymphs. But this is usually what you end up with. So how in the heck are you supposed to cast these heavy nymph rigs? And if you manage to get them where you want them, how do you know that your flies look real and are actually getting the fish's attention? Well, it's pretty simple. By the end of this video, you'll have all the tools you need to cast and present your nymphs like a pro. Today's video has two parts. We'll start out with casting, which is getting your flies where you want them to go. And then we'll cover presentation, which is making sure that your flies look enticing to the fish. So let's dive into casting, which this is something we get asked about all the time, and it's a major struggle for a lot of anglers. The key concept I want you to remember today, and this is more important than the fact that Diet Coke is better than Coke Zero, is that when you're casting these multi-fly rigs, like a double nymph rig or a dry dropper rig, you don't want the super tight, narrow loops that you get with dry flies. Instead, you want a much wider loop, and you want a wide loop for a couple of reasons. A wider loop allows your bobber, your split shot, and your nymphs to sail nice and high through the air, keeping them away from your rod tip and protecting it from breaking. And yes, if you hit the tip of your fly rod with heavy nymphs, you can break it. Don't ask me how I know that. A wider loop also prevents your flies from getting tangled up as easily. When your bobber and your split shot and your nymphs are going in a nice wide loop through the air, there's a lot less of a chance that they'll hit each other midair and get all tangled. That all sounds well and good. A wide loop, that's the solution to the problem. Well, how do I get a wide loop then, Durant? It's pretty easy. All you've got to do is slow your cast down. Remember, you want your fly line to straighten out completely before you start the next part of your casting stroke. And since you've added a couple of feet of tippet to your leader, your whole rig is a bit longer than normal. You have to wait a bit longer on each casting stroke for that line to straighten out, hence slowing down your cast. But all this only applies if you're making traditional overhead casts with your nymph rig. I usually only make those casts when I'm fishing from a drift boat or if I'm trying to get my flies about 30 feet or 3 rod lengths away. When I'm fishing inside of 30 feet or I'm on smaller water, I like to utilize 2 other casts instead, the roll cast and the water load. I've got 4 easy steps that'll help you perfect the roll cast and start getting the benefits of this technique out on the water. Step number 1, you want to bring the rod parallel with your ear, creating a loop. Step number 2, you're going to look to where you're casting. Keep your eyes on the prize. Step number 3, you're going to push that rod forward in a very fluid motion. You don't want to hinge on your elbow or on your wrist. You just want it to be a very fluid pushing motion, pushing that rod forward. Step number 4, you're going to keep the rod tip elevated. It doesn't need to be sky high and you don't need to drop it all the way down in the water. But if you keep that rod tip elevated, it'll help you properly finish your cast. The water load is really simple. I'm going to make my cast, throw a mend, I'm going to let this drift. And as I get to the end of my drift, instead of setting up for a new roll cast like I would, forming my D-loop and making it all look pretty like that, I'm just going to let my flies and my indicator and my fly line swing out directly downstream of me. Now once they've swung out, they're directly downstream of me. All I'm going to do is look upstream to where I want to cast. I'm going to raise my rod tip just slightly. I want to be able to feel the tension of the water pushing against my fly line and that indicator. Then I'm just going to move my fly rod forward, just like that. And all that tension from the water pushing on your line and your indicator loads the rod so you don't have to do it with a roll cast or a traditional overhead cast. So again, you let that come out directly beneath you and just push your rod forward. The rod's doing all of the work here. This may not be the most accurate cast in the world, but you're going to get your flies to land where you want them by pointing that rod tip where you want them to land. So I want to be right here on the inside of this little seam, kind of where there's a little bit of foam. Boom, I pointed my rod tip right there, and that's where they ended up landing. Now, 2 pro tips here for you. The water load's fun because instead of picking up to recast with a traditional overhead or a roll cast, you can let your flies swing in the current below you. And that swinging motion can actually trigger some fish to eat, especially if they are looking up, if there's some kind of hatch going on or it's about to start and there's insects emerging. That swinging motion can really trigger some great bites. And then another pro tip for you to make sure that this water load doesn't end in a giant rat's nest and you're cursing me for teaching you this skill, is make sure you let your line, your indicator, and those flies straighten out completely below you. If they're not all straight when you go to do this cast, you're going to end up with some tangles. So I like to let it straighten, get below me, and then give it a few seconds before I move the rod and make that cast. Your job as a fly angler is to get your flies in front of fish and make them look real. Now, we've covered how to get those flies in front of a fish with casting, but how do we make sure they look real? Well, that's where the presentation side comes in. You know you need to get your nymphs down to the right depth, which is something we'll cover in the next episode of this masterclass. But once your flies are down there, how do you know if they're acting naturally or not? I mean, you can't see them. Luckily, it's easy to spot drag on a nymph rig. If your indicator is moving so much that it's actually creating a wake behind it, like you could get out on your wakeboard and ride that sucker, that means it's dragging, and so are your nymphs. This is caused by your fly line pulling on your bobber because your fly line and your bobber didn't land in currents moving the same speed. To combat this, you've got to use a little skill called mending. Your drift is broken, now you got to fix it. The whole point of mending is to get your fly line and your indicator moving at the same speed. When you do this, it eliminates drag and makes those flies look as real as possible. So to accomplish a mend, all you're going to do is move your fly line so that it's moving at the same speed as your indicator. Most mends will be done upstream to place your fly line either parallel with or slightly above that indicator. Or if you're fishing a dry dropper rig, the same thing would apply. You want that fly line above the dry fly. To accomplish a mend, I'm going to make my cast. As soon as that indicator hits the water, I'm going to lift and move my fly line so that it's above or parallel with that indicator. Show you that one more time. As soon as that indicator hits the water, I am lifting and moving fly line. Your mend should be one fluid movement where you pick the line up and move it all together. If you pause during the mend, you pick your line up, pause, and then try to move it, that's where you're going to run into problems with moving your indicator too much or not being able to move your fly line at all. Again, just a nice gentle lift and move that fly line up above the indicator. Another common pain point we hear from beginners all the time is they're worried that they're moving their indicator too much during the mend. At the very beginning of the mend, if your indicator moves just a little bit, it's really not the end of the world because those flies have hit the water, they're sinking, but they're not yet in the strike zone. So a little bit of movement isn't really going to alert the fish that, hey, those flies aren't real. When movement on your indicator can be a problem is if you are in the strike zone and you are consistently moving that indicator throughout the entire mend. A little bit of movement at the beginning is not a huge problem. And one more reminder, a lot of your mending movements need to be kind of soft and subtle. You're not looking to kind of go all samurai on it and whip the line around. No, you're just looking to pick up and move the fly line. The rod is going to do a lot of the work here. You want to lift, get quite a bit of line off the water, and then flick the rod. But it should all be one movement. And these are gentle, subtle movements. Just like when you're fly casting, you're not trying to work it. You're trying to let the rod do the work. Rod's going to do a lot of the work in mending as well. So our flies are out there, they're drifting good, there's no drag, we're feeling really great about our chances. But how do we know if a fish eats one of our nymphs? Well, your bobber's gonna move in a way that's unnatural. It's either gonna stop completely, it'll shoot straight under the water, or it'll hesitate ever so slightly. If your bobber moves in a way that doesn't look like it's drifting with the current, you gotta set the hook. The hardest part about this, and you'll learn this real quick, is that hooking into a fish and hooking onto the bottom feel a lot alike. It can be really tough to tell the two apart sometimes. Generally, when you hook into the bottom, it'll feel like a fish until you actually set the hook. At that point, your flies won't fight back. They'll just pop out, or they'll get stuck, or you'll drag up half a salad's worth of moss right out of the bottom. If you set the hook and there's no fish, always check your flies to make sure you don't have salad on them. Sometimes, if you've really dialed in the weight on your nymph rig, your bobber will just bounce along with either your split shot or the weight of your nymphs just barely ticking against the bottom. You don't need to set the hook on every little bounce of that bobber. Instead, you want to wait for a very obvious take, like when your bobber stops completely, shoots underwater, or starts moving in a different direction. The more you do this, the more you'll be able to tell the difference between a fish and hooking into the bottom. This is more of the art than the science of fly fishing. It just takes a little bit of practice. Finally, I've got a bonus tip I want to share because it's helped me out a bunch. When you're nymphing, try to visualize what your nymphs are actually doing under the water. Are they drifting freely? Are they getting pulled from side to side? Are they deep enough? Are they bouncing along the bottom? This is what you want your nymphs to look like underwater. You can see these nymphs are just drifting along naturally, looking exactly like nymphs really do in the water. This is the goal. This is what you want your flies to look like. And if you can keep this in your mind's eye as you fish, it can help you dial in the perfect presentation. Of course, that's assuming that your flies are in the right spots and they're at the right depth. Figuring those two things out is one of the most vital skills of nymphing. And the best part is, it's not that hard. We're going to cover the strike zone and how to find the right places in a river to fish in the next video, which you can watch right here.